Welcome to CaFae Convos. I'm your host, Cia Melangi. The C stands for Christopher, Christina, use whatever, I don't care. And today we are joined by a woman who has won the Hugo Award twice, if I'm not mistaken, just for editing. Double bachelor's in English and Russian literature, does critical analysis of race and fashion performance in the media. Has worked for Big Five Publishing. Basically, her resume makes mine looks like a stick figure drawing. Diana, why don't you introduce yourself?
Great. Happy to be here. So for those listening, I'm Diana Foe, editorial director at Erewhon Books. My pronouns are she and her. I've been in publishing for, like almost 20 years, and it's weird because I don't feel that old, but I guess I am. I've worked in an array of positions in the industry. I've actually started off in international sales and marketing. So that was a fun time for Big Five. But my biggest stint in editorial was at Tor Books, also known as a Tor Publishing Group. I was there for almost a decade. I've also had jobs in Science Fiction Book Club when it still existed. Rest in peace, Sci-Fi Book Club. And also worked as an executive for a production company called Realm Media, which specializes in audio dramas and podcasts. So also happy to talk about those earworms as well. So happy to kick off the chat.
Like I said, a mile-long resume. It's insane. All right. So and every time I see your name, because I love pho is my favorite food. So every time I see your last name, I'm like, no, she said it was pho. It's like, it's spelled, apparently it is how it's pronounced how it looks.
Yes, it's pho like your arch nemesis.
Okay. I'm going to remember that now. Excellent. So there's something like I have some very some questions prepped for this because I always come into these very prepared. I don't scramble at the last minute at all. No, sir. But I noticed in your bio, Diana's academic work includes critical analysis of the role in race, fashion, performance, and in the media, in addition to pieces focusing on fan studies and fan communities. Does that mean you're studying fandoms like an anthropologist? What does that mean?
Well, that means I'm a professional nerd, and I'm also an academic nerd as well. So this was my fancy bio, by the way, to justify what I actually did. What I actually did was, again, I did a million things. Through in my younger years, I was actually part of a theatrical performance troupe that played steampunk characters across the United States. And then eventually I got a degree for it, and I got a master's in performance studies, where my focus was the performance of racial and national identities in steampunk subculture.
Okay. So, you're not logging onto AO3 and clocking that as your hours, is what I'm hearing.
No. I know some academics love doing that, and I just do that in my off hours.
Oh, okay. So you're in it for the love of the game.
Yeah.
You don't need to be paid for that. That's fair. I mean, I was just asking for a friend.
Totally fair. Totally. I mean, I know fanfic is such a hot topic, in publishing, particularly, when people are oh, our agents and editors just going to fanfic sites and trying to recruit people, or trying to buy best-selling fanfic books and trying to re-release them as trad books.
Yeah, Alchemize stuff recently came out.
Yeah.
It's been kicking up this hornet's nest all over again. I know, it's I personally, and I say this as someone who consumes way too much fan fiction, writes a good chunk of fan fiction, and the ideas for my original stories often originate in fan fiction. My Blackwing novella series, that was originally Diablo 2 fanfic that I just put in a different world of my own making. But it was I don't know, I feel like we need to do more than. I hear an echo.
Oh, sorry, was that me?
Yes, that was you. I didn't touch it. Okay, you fixed it. Yay. I mean, I guess for me, it's what I feel like you need to do more than just reskin or just like to just shave down the serial numbers of it. Like I don't mind people rewriting their fanfic ideas to be original works. I mean, like that's basically the whole cycle of literature since we started writing things down. But like, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I do think that this, I guess, commodification of fanfic is like, for me, I feel a ways about it just because fan fiction was created in a gift economy, and I could also talk a lot about the history of fandom, and historically about how, because like you have these, these like transformative works created in a gift economy, it's like with the expectation, not of reciprocity in that same sense or some sort of like, now let's make money off this sort of sense.
Yeah, it's all about passion.
Yeah, it's all about passion, but it's also like it's about community bonding. And I think more and more you see like all these corporations, including like ones I have worked with, admittedly, like, but trying to, kind of like, mine a market, I guess, with the assumption that you can just go into a community, take what they love the most, and resell it back to them. But that's like late stage capitalism too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that will be the struggle, I think, with a lot of the creation of like the written word nowadays. It's the pressure that people feel themselves, even if they don't intend to try to make money off of something, but the pressure to like, oh, now I have to try to like sell this as a traditional book because it's so successful in this other space. But it could just be for your community.
Yeah.
It could just be for your people, and that's okay too. And I hope that more authors realize that for themselves and don't try to feel pressured or tempted to try to change that, because that was not the intention of why they wrote it in the first place.
Yeah, no, there's a fic of mine, an Avatar: Last Airbender fic that got really it's one of my most popular. Actually, I think it is my most popular thing. And like I published it years ago, and to this day, I still get comments and kudoses and rereads and all that stuff. And like, I would never think about trying to trad publish it because that is a story that really only works in the fandom space.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's what's not clicking for a lot of these publishers and execs and executives, because it's like there are a lot of really, really good fanfic stories that would make really awful original works, and vice versa. And it's like there's just something about fanfic that can really only exist in fanfic space. And I don't like, there are some stories that, yeah, you can, with a little bit of with a lot of tinkering, you can turn it into an OG work and put it on bookshelves. But yeah, no, my fic could never do that. It would suck.
Yeah, and I totally, appreciate those types of fan fictions I read too, because you can tell that this person truly like is invested in the world, or like pushing the envelope about the pre-established like world building, or it's so character driven, but it's character driven in a very specific way that is not achievable outside of the context the character was formed in, right?
Exactly. Like, these are copyrighted characters in a copyrighted world, and it doesn't work if you lose the copyright. IP is, I love it and I hate it. So one thing, as I was researching you, not stalking, just, prepping, just ignore the camera outside your house. So you, as we mentioned at the first, you're a Hugo Award-winning editor. I thought they just awarded authors. How does that work for a newbie? And pretend to explain it to me like I'm 5, because I really don't get it.
Yeah, it's good to know, like, not that explaining to you things like you're 5, but like I think it's good that people are curious about, a very like, it is a fandom driven award. And people, first of all, people don't realize that. people think like, oh, it's like the Oscars, and there's like an academy, and true, there is, a community of voters, but it's literally anyone who attended a WorldCon either that year you're nominated or the year before, because it's part of your membership ticket, the right to vote. You can
Oh my
also
God.
still like literally buy a voting membership, any year, and just buy it to vote. So it, because
all the
WorldCon
latest
is,
controversies make so much more sense now.
yeah. So yeah, because WorldCon is like the oldest science fiction convention. That's like their claim to fame. They started off in like the in like the 1930s, I want to say. So they've been going on for many, many decades at this point. But it's always been driven by readers, for readers, by fans, for fans, And so when I explain like the major like sci-fi fantasy like awards to people, I say like, yeah, like people might assume the Hugos are like the Oscars and mainstream treats it like it because it's the biggest and it's the oldest, but really it's like the People's Choice Awards. And if you are thinking about what the Oscar equivalent is, it's the Nebulas, which is, run by the, science fiction Writers Association. It is kind of like the equivalent to the Oscars Academy. And
I have noticed that Nebula winners and nominees tend to be like, their books tend to be more academic in nature or like cerebral almost, compared to Hugo, which tends to be, I don't know how to describe it, more, I don't want to say more accessible, more like
a broader audience.
Yeah, more of a broader audience, a bit more mainstream, I guess you could say. Whereas a Nebula award winner, you're like, okay, this person's gonna go like, I'm going to learn so much about, the type of ship we're on, or like the societal issues that we're currently dealing with.
Yeah, and so, and also the Hugo Awards, like it doesn't just apply to authors, like like you mentioned, that's why it covers all these like what they call semi-professional categories as well, which is basically fandom categories, and so you can be a semi-professional artist, or you can be a critic and do like some sort of like criticism about like science fiction works. You can have a fan cast. They do have one for fan casts, for fanzines. They also have ones that apply to like best short form drama, which basically your best television show or something, or your favorite movie long form. There's categories for best fan writer, which again is a critic that does like fandom criticism about the genre.
Right.
Or and now in more recent years they've incorporated like YouTubers, like YouTube essayists, vloggers, and their long form like media essays about fandom stuff, or
where the hell is my nomination then?
I mean, I have to say, like, because again, it's like the People's Choice Awards, they also field the nominations. So there is an open window, basically as soon as the Hugo ceremony ends. They're like, oh yeah, now the window is technically open for the next WorldCon. And, because membership lasts 2 years. So people who had attended that convention, was like, oh wait, now I can start thinking about nominating people for the next one. So there is an open window for nominating. You can go to, you can look up the WorldCon like website, or you can look up the specific convention for that following year. For example, this year it's going to be in LA, so it's at WorldCon LA. Next year it's going to be in Montreal. So the Montreal WorldCon website is already up. So you can also learn about them, as well. But there is an open window for anyone to like submit a nomination as long as you have that membership.
Neat.
Yeah.
So nominating editors is like, because is it like, does the editor have to work for trad publishing? Does it have to be like the author is nominated and so the editor is nominated too? Is it freelance editors? Like, how does the Hugo award winning editor, how is that figured out?
Yeah. So, and it's a great history behind it too, because it's definitely linked to the history of like science fiction fantasy publishing in general. So it's first of all, it's very rare to have just an award category for an editor in any genre. Mm-hmm. And the reason why WorldCon has one is because when they started the convention, it also tied into like this huge, very active, very lively, community of magazine publishing. It was like, the heyday of, all of like, getting your science fiction stories published in all these magazines, including some that still exist today, like Analog or Science Fiction Fantasy Magazine, and in sci-fi, the community has always had a very vibrant short fiction, community. So, even today, there is one of our categories for the Hugos is best like semi-pro magazine for that specific reason, for like fan magazines, but also for that, traditional like short form magazines, as well. And it's part of that because they had, so much short fiction. The organizers advocated for like, hey, if an author can be nominated for a short story, a publication should be able to be nominated too. And the editor of that short fiction publication should also be able to be nominated because there's everyone together that made that work possible. So that invented the category for just editorial short form, like editing short fiction, and you had to like edit like a certain number of published short fiction pieces. It didn't have to be for a specific publication, but because most editors primarily work for one magazine or something, that tended to happen, but you could be nominated for like, editing a certain number of short fiction things that have been published in a given year. And in turn, for book publishing, they're like, well, if there's a short form one, there has to be a long form one for editors who work on novels, and so that's how that category is formed as well. And so, so I have been the recipient of the long form category for editorial for two different times. So that's explains the whole background for that.
That does explain a lot. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Okay, I got a tough one for you. So writing, storytelling, making books, that is an art, and art is subjective. So how can anyone determine what is best or even good? Like, how do you determine good writing? Like, yes, this should have an award first, like, especially for like, with it sounds like Hugo is almost more of a popularity contest, but as anyone who's been on Book Talk for 5 minutes will tell you, popular doesn't necessarily mean good. So like, I don't know, just how do you, I guess I'm asking, how do you define good writing compared to burn it?
I think that is such a tricky question because you can like ask 10 people and get like 15 to 20 different answers, and as, an editor employed at, a publishing house, my answer could also be different than say someone who acquires for a short fiction magazine or someone who is a freelance editor or something like that, because there's different artistic like sensibilities, but there's also, different intentions and goals of why we acquire certain works and why we choose to publish them with our publisher, and so for anyone who is employed by a publisher and is not freelance, like there is always an element that like I am buying something because it fits the brand of the house that I work for, or it fits the categories I'm allowed to acquire for, or my publisher liked it and thinks I should be the editor for it, or
my publisher thinks we can make money off of it.
Yes, or the publisher thinks we can make money off of it. Like, so there's always that element, and so I'm not going to deny that. But I also think where editorial taste comes in, it's really to make the argument about why something is good and make it explainable and accessible to people who have not read the book yet. So and it's a skill set, and part of it is like, for me when I'm acquiring something, because I've read like, I get a lot of submissions, all the time in general, like I'll also say that thing, like editors are constantly flooded with submissions. It's always an uphill struggle to go through them, no matter what venue you work for. And because people love to write, and that's really exciting to see. But I also know that like when I'm acquiring, when I think of something's good, I definitely have seen many good things that I've passed on because like it's great. I love the writing personally, but I can't see it be the right fit for the house. Or, I couldn't make that argument in acquisitions meeting that we should buy this because I couldn't convince everyone in the room to invest in this book in the way that I feel like we should invest in it, right? And it could be a legit reason, like, so I'll definitely say that first. Like, good writing doesn't necessarily mean that it is instantly publishable, because I've seen many things that are instantly publishable in many different ways, but it's just not the right fit for me for my job related reasons. But good writing itself, I think, can be equivalent to a lot of various elements too. Like, and that plays into part of editorial taste. Like, you can love something because the words are so beautiful, the sentence structure is so evocative, like the experimental format of the book is so brilliant, like the ideas are so smart. Like, that is like one type of really good writing, and that's very true. And you can also have good writing because it's good storytelling. Like, the plot is just racing. Like, there's so many twists that you don't expect. Like, you can't stop turning the pages because there's a really compelling quality. And I think that actually is something that is hard to translate until you actually, I don't know it until I read it, and that is so subjective. So, because for me, something that might feel like a page turner might be like different for a different editor because they acquire like literary fiction, or because they acquire just like a different genre. And so they're like, I don't get what these aliens are about. I don't know what this means. Like, you know what I mean? So that's why also the definition of good writing can change so much. But I also do think, and I think it's hard to, that's probably something like writers talk about, but also like hard for them to admit, that there are books out there that are really great storytellers, even if the line by line writing isn't the strongest.
Yeah.
And there is a difference between having beautiful writing and having a good story.
Yeah, there really is. Lord knows I've put down books because like I love the concept and I love like Stephen King is kind of my go-to example of just like someone who I love it when his stuff gets turned into movies, but I cannot read his, like, I've tried, just something with his writing style just does not mesh with me. And maybe I tried it too young. I'm 30 years old now. Maybe I just needed to mature a little bit and I need to take another crack at him. But yeah, no, I don't know. So there's been I live online, and so I've been hearing a lot of things, and it blows my mind because this has not been my experience in trad publishing at all. But so many people in the online book community have been noticing that a lot of trad books have been declining in quality. And they're from on like every level. So there's like they're noticing more typos and grammar and spelling mistakes that you would expect more in a self-publishing book that like couldn't afford a line editor. But to get it in a trad book is weird. Less, subjectively, less good stories, more reskinned fanfics. Like, they're noticing this. So what is going on? Are you guys okay? Is this a cry for help? What's happening over there?
Secret cry for help, like our typo spelled SOS repeatedly. It's that's so I love this question. Also, I will preamble by saying this is totally like my opinion. I do not represent. I probably preambled this before.
Tell us, you give us the stance of the entire industry, every single editor and agent and publisher. You speak for them now.
Right. And I definitely am not speaking on behalf of my own company that I work for, by the way, just for me.
How fast can we get Diana fired today?
But I do think there's been a lot of pressures too on the professional side. Like, burnout is real. Like, burnout has always been real in publishing because of the time frame that people expect books to come out. Everyone's underpaid. One of the things that have shocked people that don't work in publishing when I tell them this, they're like, oh, so if you have a best-selling book, does the editor also get some sort of bonus? And I'm like, not always. It's not connected to that success. We don't get extra money if something hits the New York Times list. They were like, what? What? We don't get extra money if something gets nominated for an award. And they're like, why? I'm like, we just don't, so that's a hard thing, but everyone is, systemically underpaid, not just editors, by the way. So it's and I do think it depends on, it can get very in inside baseball, like why certain things happen and what the publishing strategy is for some books versus others. So that's probably the most diplomatic way I could say. Sometimes books are just bought quickly to get published quickly. And because when that happens, sometimes corners might be cut. Sometimes things might be rushed through because they want to get it on the shelves and things are missed. Sometimes, especially if it's something that has been indie published, maybe a publisher might think, oh, the indie author already did that editing, they already did that proofreading themselves, and we're just buying it to publish it under our own brand. So they might not get a second pass or a cleanup pass or anything like that. That might be happening.
To me. But
it is. I mean, as someone who has also looked through 6 passes of a manuscript before it goes to pub, it is mind-boggling to think that something might slip through, but it happens, and also we're all human. Sometimes something is just missed by people and just ends up in the final book and then it gets fixed in the reprint.
Frankly, I'm always kind of impressed. It almost feels like that one typo that manages to survive the countless rounds of the author going through it, the content editor, the line editor, the grammar and proofreader person, all those rounds. And if that typo is still there, that typo has earned its place. It's part of the book now.
And FYI, authors have final review and approval of their text. And sometimes, I'm not going to say specific authors, but sometimes an author would be like, "Stet," and we're like, "That's grammatically incorrect," in a way that is not fitting the actual story, or or the actual dialogue of the character. Because if a character talks a certain way, then that's totally understandable. It's totally
style.
That's style. But there's definitely authors who are like, "No, this is the grammatical rule," and that grammatical rule is not correct in your understanding. But then they keep studying it, and then they're like, "No." But then, it's sometimes that happens too,
No, I definitely felt a little bit of that heat when I was writing CITADEL sequel Demon's Nest. Because like CITADEL took me 14 years. And then they're like, okay, we want the sequel now. And I'm just like, when do you want it? And they're like, soon. We're going to give you 6 months. And I'm just like, okay. And my literary agent is just like, you just have to give them something. It doesn't have to be perfect. They're that's what the editors are for. They're gonna pretty it up for you, and then you guys can go back and forth on stuff. And I'm just like, but it has to be perfect now. It's I don't want anyone to see it unless it is as perfect as I can make it. And my agent almost killed me through the phone.
The other thing I keep telling writers all the time is that when they ask what's your best piece of advice, I'd say finish stuff. Just finish it. Just finish it and send it on and work on the next thing.
But it's not ready yet. I can make it better. I do. I intellectually and fundamentally, I do understand that perfect is the enemy of good. I mean, it's not even just the enemy of good; it's the enemy of done. But I have people I can disappoint now. When it was my debut novel, nobody knew who I was and nobody cared. And now it's oh crap, I have a whole fandom that I can disappoint now. That's phenomenal. pressure. It's fine. So you mentioned, things that you often tell your authors. What are some big mistakes that you see authors make that, or even publishers make, that you think people don't talk about enough?
Like mistakes in the publishing process, mistakes in the writing, or
Yes.
you know,
I guess most of the people watching this are authors or aspiring authors. So let's start there. What are some big mistakes that you've seen authors make that you would like to put a spotlight on?
Yeah. I mean, first is, even if it comes to like stuff like, authors, they finish the manuscript, they're ready to shop it around, they're ready to start the publishing process and what that might look like. There's so many resources about learning about the publishing process and what it, and how to find an agent and what it takes to get a book published. That at this point, like, an author can be very well informed about how the publishing process works and kind of undercuts any mistakes they might make. And, like, for example, if you can look up whether a publisher is open to unagented manuscripts or not. It's posted very clearly on like the publisher website, or if you have a resource like Writers Writers Marketplace or something, or Publishers Marketplace. You can look up the standards of the house, really easily, like what genres they publish. I've definitely heard pitches at conferences, or approached by writers, at conferences or conventions. They're like, oh, I want to talk about my book. And they talk about a nonfiction book. Or they talk about a children's picture book. And I'm like, that's great. You know that I'm an editor, but you obviously didn't look up what I edit. It's great. It sounds like a good idea. You should go to someone else, So just having an awareness of what the environment they're going into, it doesn't have to be like super precise, like detailed stuff, but a general overview about which houses acquire what the general life cycle of a book is, because you can actually look that up too. It might be, the details might be slightly different at every house, but the general gist of how a book gets published is basically the same. And what you should do as an author to like prepare yourself, in expectations about what it is like to work with a publisher. Your mileage may vary in a lot of ways, but there's also, quite a few resources. I think if I can recommend one in this podcast, Jane Friedman. She's a publisher consultant, with decades of experience. She has tons and tons of free resources on her site, like telling even really basic things, like everything I just mentioned now, and also she can go into detailed stuff, like if you're debating between being self-pubbed or traditionally pubbed, what are the pros and cons, or you have a meeting, you're looking at agents to represent your book. What kind of questions should you ask? Like stuff like that. She also has, on her site, and I think that's super informative and great resource to writers. And there's also just very genre specific associations where writers can get together and share information with each other. And they're always open to aspiring to be published writers, to join their organizations or to learn from them. As I mentioned, there's a Science Fiction Writers Association. There's a Horror Writers Association. There's a Society for Children's Writers and Illustrators. So there's for every single market or genre, there is some sort of professional community of writers already talking to each other, and people should find them and people should learn from them.
So what I'm hearing is it's not necessarily basically just kind of do your research in how the publishing industry works and just the standard steps that need to be taken, and don't think that you're the exception to the rule when it comes to stuff like that. Just do some basic research on who you're talking to, and then go from there. Is kind of what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and also a thing that I always talk about writers to think about is just to have a conversation with themselves about, why did you write this book? you know? Uh, you know, can you tell, like, can you explain in, in a way that, uh, to another person, like, what is your passion behind the book? What's the big why? Because once you know the big why of why you wrote this particular book, that'll help you lead to like other places of like who you think the best agent might be, who you think the best publisher might be, stuff like that. And you can also apply that question career wise. Like there's some people that just want to write one book, the book of their heart, their memoir, or something like that, and that's it, and that's fine, you know. But if you know that you're just going to write one book, that's different than from being like, oh, I want to be a working writer, or I hope someday my book will be nominated for this major award, or I want to be able to write like, a certain genre of fiction, whether it's like romance or horror or literary, because, then you can start looking around. You can do a little like research about what other, writers are doing, what their career trajectory is like. Do you want your career trajectory to feel like theirs? And those are like business questions that like authors might not think about. But I think having some perspective about where you want to be can really help narrow down what you're looking for and where to look for it.
We're the creative type. We're allergic to business questions. Like it really does feel like it, because like even as someone who like knew going in, I want to be a career author, I know for a fact that I'm going to get rejected a gazillion times before I find even the literary agent that I like, never mind the editor that is going to take me on. Even knowing all this stuff, I'm just like, I just want to close myself up in the room and not talk to anyone for 8 hours a day and write. Is that too much to ask? And apparently a lot of times it is. You do have to think about the business side of things. And then like, what are some mistakes that you think that like, I don't know, like what are some ways that you think that, I mean, there's just so much going on right now, like with the publishing world, like, Gen AI and just every, social media and just everything else. What are some, I guess, what are your thoughts on like the publishing industry's biggest struggles right now, and like how you think that they can course correct, and or even will they, or can they?
One thing I'll say is that I don't think publishing is going away tomorrow. I feel like there's always like some, the sky is falling, Chicken Little, anxiety that goes around the community, especially during moments of like whether it's seen as an industry shift or a change of some sort. But change will happen that will affect the industry. So that's the other thing. Like, I do think, and this is a thought I've had, for many years now, is that as soon as we, had the concept of like large language models, then, I thought instantly it's going to change the markets of certain types of publishing. Like, for example, when it first came out, and I want to say like, the first early versions of it came out like 10 years ago, or like, 12 years ago, like, one of the things I thought about, like, oh, if you are a serial writer, like if you are a writer that has like a Patreon or is on Royal Road and like has that weekly like drop of your new chapter, like that'll be the game changer, because you'll be able to, if you use a large language model and put all of your previous works in it and make it a private one, so like it's not accessible to like everyone, it's not feeding your work out in a large way, but if you base it off your own writing, and just keep it to yourself, then you'll be able to like produce your own like serial dropped chapters in a much faster way, because then you'll be able, it's based on your own writing, you can clean up yourself, you'll be
but
able
you're
to like
not
add in
writing it, you're
not writing, you're basically like pulling together piecemeal stuff that you've already previously written that's regurgitated back at you. But I can see a certain type of publishing strategy where indie writers like, I'm already on Royal Road, this is what I do, I know my audience, they want this and this, and just do it. That was my first idea. I also see that already, like, even if book publishing is very rescindent and about about dedicating themselves to AI, there are other media companies or industries that will take it over, and that'll affect writers. Like, you already see this happening in film and television. Like, screenwriters are rightly very anxious because now they're getting deals where the studio is like, hey, can you do a punch up, which is basically like, can you like streamline or tweak up this already previously AI generated script so it actually sounds good. And because the rates that you're paid to like punch up a work, as a screenwriter, is dramatically lower than if you're an originator of that screenplay. Like, that's the loophole they found, and now it's kind of like there's been a word that's been happening around film and television. There's also like current arguments about this copyright, who retains a copyright, and for them it's the studio, so they don't care because they're the ones who like created it, the idea, and the process of them writing it, they're just like, now they're underpaying all these other writers to make it good. And that's going to pull down rates across the board, and that's going to make all the unions mad, and that was something they were fighting for, with these like latest like writers like strikes the past like few years. That was why they were so adamant about some sort of clause addressing generative AI, because they knew it could come after them like that.
Yeah.
So, and then you can also see like it just affecting like other genres more than others. Like, for example, like there is a reason why like a lot of generative AI, has a hit like romance, because romance is the largest category. It has the most readers, but also has the most like material that when they were initially scraping the, everyone's books, majority of it was romance and majority of it was fan fiction, and that's why you have these like, and romance, like everyone has tropes, like every, genre has its tropes, but romance historically has also been written on a certain formula for certain types of series books in order to gain success.
Right.
So that will affect, romance writers in a way that might not affect other writers,
Yeah, there was this, a few weeks ago, there was this article of this gal who, quote unquote, wrote 200 romance books in the past year using generative AI, and it was so successful, she's selling a course on teaching others how to do the same, which means that those books aren't selling very well at all.
Right.
Wonder why. But like she was quoted to say something along the lines of like, romance is always at like the head of the publishing industry, so it's like new technologies tend to hit romance first, so it's adapt or die, was her argument. And I'm just like, or you could just learn to write better romance. It's not my genre, but just a thought.
Yeah.
Cannot wait.
And not to mention the other thing that's happening about how Harlequin is now trying to develop their various Harlequin series into like little like AI generated animated shorts for video.
I did not know that. Are you serious?
Yeah,
oh my God.
Everyone's mad. Obviously, everyone is mad, and because again, they've had such a large backlist of authors who are not around anymore, and they still have ownership of that IP, for example, or they're not contacting people, which is also crappy, So there's a lot of scenarios I can see things like that happening, and and that's one of the struggles I think that publishing will have to deal with.
Yeah, no, gosh, as a YouTuber and content creator, I'm just like, that last was just like, oh my God, there are so many better ways to do that than to just make slop. Okay, so here's one thing, and it's kind of a general question, but also not. So like, there's going from a beginner author to an intermediate author is not necessarily easy, but it is at least very least straightforward. Like learn grammar, learn plot structure, learn the basics of character development, and all that stuff. And then once you hit intermediate, once you have a mastery of at least the basics, that's usually when people can, in my experience at least, that's usually when they can start, publishing work, and it's like work that people enjoys to read. How does one improve? What are some advice that you would give to someone who wants to improve their craft beyond the basics to be more of an advanced or even a master level of author, if such a thing exists?
Well, I always think that everyone can improve upon their skill set, even the masters. There's always something new or interesting to learn. And same thing with editors too. It's kind of like I'm always learning something. I feel like of every book I work on, I learn something new, whether it's about editing, whether it's about strategy, whether it's about tackling or rethinking about a genre in a different way. And that's why I think that is why people love books, because it can feel so individualized and unique every single time, no matter how long you've done it. And so for writers who, are thinking about improving their craft, I know, there has been that kind of a piece of advice saying just read widely. And what I will add to that is that not just read widely, but be able to break down concisely or concretely, what elements you liked, what elements you didn't like, what elements you want to explore more in something that you read. And more than that, in storytelling in general, because I have a background in performance studies and theater, I use so many playwriting things and so many theater things, when thinking about my editorial work and how I want to edit something or how I visualize, the book and how I want to position it to the market. Everything in your background just plays into the story, plays how you want to present your book, even if you're conscious of it or not. And same thing goes with if you're a writer and just looking to up your skill set, if you're just a fan of films, of anime, of comic books, of video games, what kind of storytelling mechanisms from those media forms interest you and you want to try to incorporate in your writing, and how does that work? How did it work well? One of my favorite things to do as well is that I listen to a lot of podcasts, and some of my favorite craft podcasts, I listen to writing ones, but I also listen to screenwriter ones, because I just think the art of screenwriting is so fascinating. It's very unlikely I'll ever be a screenwriter, but just thinking in their head, the different way they construct a scene, the things that they think they're important, because they're essentially working on a document that is going to be more artistically collaborative than a novelist, I find intriguing. So they'll pick up stuff that, that they know that they're good at, they want to express, but they want to communicate it to someone who has a different skill set to add their own twist. That, cinematographer, add their own twist. Composer of the music, add their own twist based on these words, based on this framework. And I find that really cool, And how do you convey that? How do you allow that type of artistic collaboration? But I do think the most successful novels, my opinion, take a grain of salt, are collaborative works. And it's not collaborative saying oh, it's co-authored, but it's you can tell that the author had a vision, the editor supported that vision, but also had their own vision. The cover designer was able to take that and translate the words into visuals in a concrete way. Obviously, the salespeople, you never know what the sales reps are talking about, but they're having a bajillion conversations in the background with every single bookseller that bought your book and put it in their store, or every single online retailer that put it in their catalog. They have their own vision of the book that they talk about based on what they read. So it is this big collaborative process. And so I think the more people are absorbed in kind of not just the industry itself, but also the nature of how to take different elements of storytelling or different tools of storytelling and how to apply it, across your work, I think it'll help develop it greatly in interesting ways and very unique ways, because it's already filtered through your experience.
Right. Okay. So what I'm hearing is just keep hacking at it.
Just keep hacking it. I mean, there are programs, obviously, people always debate whether they should do the MFA route or not.
Yeah.
You know, that's like another can of worms, you know? Yeah.
Well, that was always interesting to me because, like, for me, my mother is a New York Times International bestselling author, and she never went further than high school in terms of her education. And I went to college with the full intention of getting a degree in creative writing, but the laundry list of classes was so long that if you weren't getting in your freshman semester, like first semester, you were staying in college for an extra year. So I ended up getting a completely different degree, almost totally divorced from creative writing, which has improved my writing quite a bit because I chose history and social justice, which, you know, great for world building. But, you know, not so if like, okay, what's the best way to create this sentence to create urgency type of thing. We've been yapping for almost an hour. Are there any final thoughts or words of infinite wisdom that you would like to bestow upon anyone who may be listening, be they author, editor, or consumer?
Well, you know, and I guess I always like to end on a positive, upbeat note. You know, I think nowadays people are so anxious about the world ending. And what I think is so important is really like how you should still create despite everything. Because that is what art is. It is communication, it is expression, it is like whatever is buried like deep in your subconscious or deep in your heart or deep in your soul, just putting it out there. You know, I think art making is so essential to what makes us human, to what makes us connected. And it's really like one of the few solutions against the horrors of today, you know, is that constant reminders, whether it's with yourself or with another person, that we are together in this and we are connected, you know, and bonded through the things that we create. So, yeah.
Yeah. And also writing for spite is really, really fun.
Yeah, exactly. I've known many successful authors who wrote from spite. So.
I know, right? Like, it's, oh gosh, no, there's a whole magical series that I want to write that's really just a middle finger to Rowling. But I already have enough series going on, so I'm not going to open that one just yet. Well, thank you so much for coming on to my channel, Diana, and sharing your worldly wisdom with us. I really appreciate it. I'm going to have your website linked in the description of this video. And good luck with the next Hugos.
Yeah, thanks. You know, we'll see what happens. You know, it should be exciting.